Nestled at the edge of a scenic lakeside in the Midwest, Oak Ridge Vista was a neighborhood that outsiders frequently described as picturesque. Impeccably trimmed hedges, matching mailboxes, and neat footpaths meandered past houses that formed pastel rows beneath tall oak trees. Many residents took pride in how well the flower beds bloomed each spring, how the leaves were dutifully raked each fall, and how the entire place had the appealing uniformity of a well-run suburban enclave. Yet, like any neighborhood with a homeowners association, HOA, Oak Ridge Vista also had its fair share of drama. Most issues stayed small, a short debate over fence heights here, a mild squabble about holiday decor there. But in the past few years, a new face on the HOA board had turned these once petty quarrels into dramatic battles. Her name was Claudia Whitfield, though half the neighborhood privately referred to her by the moniker Karen, a nickname reflecting her perpetual sense of entitlement and readiness to escalate the smallest friction into a full-blown crisis. Claudia Karen Whitfield was in her late 40s, possessed a sharp jawline and blonde highlighted hair that was always neatly styled. She had a habit of wearing pastel button-downs, pressed trousers, and low-heeled pumps, even when simply strolling through the neighborhood. Her posture announced an unyielding self-confidence, shoulders back, chin lifted, arms often crossed as she surveyed what she deemed the imperfections of Oak Ridge Vista. A small dog named Nutmeg, a yappy Pomeranian, typically accompanied her on these patrols. Residents would know they were being inspected by the brisk click of Karen's heels on the sidewalk and the shrill bark of Nutmeg. Although Oak Ridge Vista was governed by an HOA board of several members, Karen acted as if she were the sole authority. She prided herself on memorizing bylaws, quoting obscure codes, and finding ways to interpret these regulations in whichever manner gave her the most leverage. Whether it was an incorrect shade of mulch or a prohibited front lawn ornament, she always found a reason to chastise homeowners, especially those she perceived as lax or uncooperative. Karen's antics never ceased to perplex Oak Ridge Vista's longtime residents. Many tried to reason with her or pacify her demands. A few challenged her, but these challenges often fizzled in the face of her dogged persistence. As time went on, people learned to keep their heads down and comply with her nitpicking. A general tension settled across Oak Ridge Vista, like a storm cloud waiting to unleash a downpour on the unsuspecting. If there was one person who epitomized the laid-back spirit many yearned for in Oak Ridge Vista, it was Mr. James Leland. Formerly a history teacher at the local high school, James was in his early 70s with a warm smile and an amiable nature. He had retired a few years prior, and though he occasionally missed the hustle and bustle of the classroom, he found serenity in quiet hobbies. Tinkering with woodworking in his garage, reading historical novels on his porch, and, his favorite pastime, grilling hot dogs in his backyard on sunny weekend afternoons. Mr. Leland's property was modest yet cozy. A one-story ranch house with a neat lawn out front, a maple tree that offered refreshing shade, and a small backyard that opened onto a narrow wooded strip. There, among the chirping birds and dappled sunlight, James had set up a simple charcoal grill that bore the marks of time, some scratched paint, a bit of rust at the edges. Still, it functioned perfectly for his relaxed cookouts. When James grilled, the aromas of sizzling hot dogs and light smoke drifted pleasantly through the yard. Neighbors sometimes paused to call out a friendly "smells great" from over the fence. If a curious kid wandered by, James was the sort who would offer a friendly wave, or even an extra hot dog if the child had permission. It was a small ritual of neighborliness that brightened the otherwise homogeneous environment of Oak Ridge Vista. But such simple joys were precisely what irked Claudia Karen Whitfield. From the moment she noticed all that smoke drifting across James's yard on a warm Saturday, she decided it was an infraction of some rule. Her hawkish gaze latched onto the phenomenon. Was the grill placed the correct number of feet away from the property line? Did it violate air quality standards? Karen had yet to find a specific HOA bylaw about cooking in one's backyard. Most residents would have called it a normal slice of American life. But Karen was not one to give up so easily. It began with subtle disapproval. One afternoon, as James sat in his lawn chair waiting for the charcoal to heat, he noticed Karen standing on the sidewalk, arms folded, watching the thin tendrils of smoke ascend into the sky. She said nothing that day, just stared, frowning, then marched off in a swirl of indignation, Nutmeg yapping at her heels. A few days later, James found a letter in his mailbox. HOA notice of concern read the heading, followed by an official statement about possible nuisances that may endanger property values or create hazard. The language was vague, but James knew exactly who had instigated it. He sighed, placed the letter aside, and decided to continue his moderate grilling as usual. The next weekend, Karen took a different approach. She walked directly onto James's driveway and tapped sharply on the side gate leading to the backyard. Surprised, James put down the pair of tongs he was using to turn the hot dogs and greeted her near the fence. "Mr. Leland," she began. Karen's voice dripped with tense politeness, as if trying to cling to courtesy while exuding disapproval. "I've been observing your barbecuing routine for some time now. I'm concerned about the proximity of the grill to flammable materials. We have an HOA code requiring at least 10 feet between open flames and any wooden structure." James blinked. "I'm quite certain my grill is more than 10 feet away from the house. And this is just a simple hot dog cookout, nothing big." Karen's brows tightened. "Even so, the smoke could be a disturbance to neighbors. And we do have a strict limit on anything that could be labeled an environmental nuisance." James offered a friendly shrug. "Ms. Whitfield, I'd be happy to talk about ways to reduce smoke if it's genuinely an issue, but I'm not aware of any neighbor complaints. Nobody else has approached me about it." His voice was gentle, radiating the same patience he'd once offered unruly students in his classroom. She pursed her lips. "We'll see if you're in compliance once I check the details." With that vague threat, she pivoted on her heel and marched away, Nutmeg letting out a single high-pitched yap in punctuation. James returned to his grill. The smell of sizzling hot dogs felt comforting, but now there was a tension in the air, an awareness that a neighborhood watchful eye was scanning for a reason to pounce. Word spread fast through Oakbridge Vista. The midweek gossip at the local convenience store often included the phrase, "Did you hear Karen's after Mr. Leland's grill now?" Longtime residents groaned, rolling their eyes at another of Karen's crusades. A few had sympathy for James, sharing stories of how Karen once forced a neighbor to remove her wind chimes, allegedly too noisy. Another shared that Karen demanded a local college student repaint his entire fence because the hue was slightly off the association's approved color palette. For the most part, James stayed calm. He believed that civility and communication could solve problems before they spiraled. However, Karen's dissatisfaction festered. She was convinced that James's smoke signals were a sign of greater negligence, perhaps even an outright fire hazard. If she couldn't find a direct bylaw violation, she might interpret an indirect one. So, she hovered near James's yard whenever he grilled, taking photos on her phone of the smoke drifting upward. She even tried to talk with neighbors, fishing for someone to admit that James's cooking was a nuisance. Instead, she mostly encountered shrugs or polite comments like, "Actually, it smells quite good." This only irritated her more. Late spring arrived, bringing warm breezes and lush greenery. James decided to host a small, informal hot dog day for a few of his old teaching colleagues. He set up a folding table on the lawn, laid out chips and condiments, and planned to grill the hot dogs right before noon so that they'd be ready just as his friends arrived. That Saturday, the sky was bright, and the sun glinted off the yard's dew. James fired up his grill around 11:30 a.m. The charcoal glowed orange, and soon enough, plumes of gentle smoke curled into the air. The aroma was enough to make anyone's mouth water, except for Karen's, who loomed next door, possibly seething as she watched. James's friends trickled in around noon, exchanging hugs and pleasantries. They chatted about old students, recent travels, and everyday life. Two of them were retirees like James. One was still teaching full-time. Another had brought her teenage granddaughter along, who politely set out plates and napkins. The atmosphere was cheerful and relaxed. Suddenly, however, that tranquility shattered with the arrival of something highly unexpected, the wail of emergency sirens rolling into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors poked their heads out of doors and windows. A large, red fire engine came rumbling down the street, followed by a smaller fire chief's vehicle. The vehicles halted abruptly in front of James's house, lights flashing. Firefighters jumped off, scanning the area for smoke or flames. Alarmed, James rushed around the side of his house to meet them. His old heart thundered, He wondered if there was an actual emergency somewhere. One of the firefighters, a tall man with soot-streaked gear, approached him and asked in a firm voice, "Sir, we got a call about a fire. Can you direct us to the scene?" James blinked in astonishment. My grill is right there, but it's only hot dogs. I swear there's no real fire hazard." Over by the grill, a few wisps of smoke curled into the air, hardly enough to constitute an inferno. The firefighter frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "We were told there was a major blaze threatening structures." The caller claimed black smoke was billowing, and there was no control over the fire. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, exchanging disbelieving glances. A few let out exasperated sighs, immediately suspecting who might have called in such a report. Sure enough, at the edge of the onlookers stood Karen, phone in hand, eyes darting around with feigned innocence. Feeling both bewildered and embarrassed, James showed the firefighters his grill, which held maybe a dozen hot dogs with a gentle glow beneath. No large flames, no roiling black smoke, nothing except standard backyard cooking. The firefighters put their gear down, shook their heads, and apologized to James. "Sir, everything seems safe here. Sorry for the disturbance. Someone reported a severe fire." As the firefighters packed their equipment away, their expressions betrayed annoyance at having wasted resources on a false alarm. The entire neighborhood's eyes were drawn to Karen, who, for once, looked uncomfortable under so many gazes. Still, her posture remained stiff. She stepped forward, cleared her throat, and announced, "I was only acting in the interest of public safety. If there was any chance of a fire, I had a duty to report it." A ripple of incredulous muttering passed through the small crowd. The lead firefighter, a middle-aged woman with the rank of captain, turned to Karen and said in a level but firm tone, "Ma'am, misuse of emergency services is a serious matter. If there wasn't evidence of a legitimate threat, we encourage you to handle minor concerns through local channels before calling us." Karen's cheeks reddened at the chastisement, but her lips pressed into a stubborn line. "I disagree. Better safe than sorry." James, overhearing this, felt a surge of anger, the first time in many years that he felt truly incensed. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to keep calm. He thanked the firefighters, who departed with an echo of the siren as they left the neighborhood, presumably annoyed at the wasted call. The entire incident cast a pall over James's cookout. His guests were shaken, and the hot dogs had grown lukewarm by the time everyone regrouped. Still, they tried to salvage the day with some subdued conversation, hoping to reclaim a bit of the friendly atmosphere. Around them, neighbors approached, expressing sympathy. "James, this is outrageous," said one older man who lived across the street. "I saw Karen out here on her phone, and next thing, that fire engine shows up. You should file a complaint about false reporting." Others nodded, chiming in with their own frustrations. "She's crossed the line this time," said one woman. "We have to do something about her petty harassment." But James, ever the peaceful soul, only sighed. "I don't want a neighborhood feud. I just want to grill the occasional hot dog in peace." Nevertheless, the entire cul-de-sac was abuzz with the news. Karen had called the fire department on Mr. Leland, the kindly retiree who'd never caused anyone trouble. Even those who had tried to give Karen the benefit of the doubt in previous controversies found it difficult to defend this. The city's resources had been wasted, James had been humiliated in front of his friends, and the association's board would now be under scrutiny for enabling someone who twisted rules to suit personal vendettas. Within days, a flurry of emails circulated among HOA board members. Many of them had grown weary of Karen's relentless micromanaging, but she was articulate, always had documentation, and rarely gave them clear grounds to counter her. This time, however, the fiasco with the fire department was not easy to ignore. Homeowners demanded an explanation. A special session of the HOA was called for the following Saturday morning. In the small community center near Oakbridge Vista's entrance, about 30 residents gathered. Folding chairs faced a long table where the board members sat. Karen arrived early, wearing a neat blazer and pencil skirt, hair pinned immaculately. She clearly intended to argue that her actions were justified. James also arrived, albeit reluctantly. Neighbors urged him to attend and share his perspective. He wanted no drama but agreed that it was important to set the record straight. When the meeting commenced, the board president, a soft-spoken man named Carl Donovan, welcomed everyone and announced the main topic, the fire department call and general concerns about the HOA's role in such incidents. Murmurs spread throughout the crowd. Carl turned to Karen and asked if she'd like to begin with an explanation. Karen stood, clearing her throat. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by stating that my actions were in no way malicious or intended to inconvenience our local fire services. I responded to what I perceived as a pressing danger, a large pillar of smoke behind Mr. Leland's property. We must not underestimate the risk of fire in a community with homes in close proximity. I believed I was acting for the collective safety of Oakbridge Vista. Carl nodded, then looked at James. Mr. Leland, would you like to respond? James rose slowly, his voice calm yet firm. I've been grilling hot dogs in my backyard for years without any trouble. There wasn't a large pillar of smoke, just the usual bit you get from a small charcoal grill. My neighbors can attest that there has never been an out-of-control flame or risk to any property. This was a false alarm, plain and simple. A woman from the back piped up, I'm behind Mr. Leland's lot. I saw no hazard, just normal barbecue smoke. Karen overreacted. Another resident added, calling the fire department was extreme. Couldn't you have talked to him directly if you were that concerned? Karen's gaze swept over them, disapproval etched on her face. I did speak to him. Repeatedly. My concerns were not heeded. And if there's even a small chance of a fire spreading, we need to respond swiftly. Our houses are not separated by farmland. You know, one spark can set off a catastrophe. The crowd grumbled. Some recognized that yes, fires could pose a danger, but nothing about James's easygoing grilling pointed to a major hazard. After a tense back and forth, the board agreed to review the community guidelines concerning outdoor cooking. But as it stood, there was no rule forbidding James's modest grill. Before adjourning, Carl attempted to smooth tensions. Let's be clear. Residents should respect general safety when grilling. At the same time, calling emergency services is a serious step, not to be taken lightly unless there's genuine evidence of immediate danger. I hope we can all learn from this and avoid future misunderstandings. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she nodded stiffly. James quietly departed, unsure if any real resolution had been reached. In the wake of that chaotic HOA meeting, James found unexpected allies. Neighbors who had been timid about confronting Karen now felt emboldened. Her extreme action had been a step too far. Residents came by James's house, bringing small tokens, homemade cookies, offers to help clean the grill, or just warm words of support. As a gesture of solidarity, some started organizing casual weekend cookouts in their own yards, intentionally inviting James and telling him to bring his best hot dog recipe. The camaraderie that blossomed was reminiscent of old-fashioned neighborhood block parties, something that had dwindled over the years under Karen's watchful eye. A few residents even joked about forming a hot dog appreciation club. One Saturday, James was surprised when a pair of neighbors, Linda and Pete Albright, came to his door with a proposition. They held a brochure for a specialized outdoor grilling station, a waist-high metal platform with a built-in fire-safe mat beneath it. It was designed to meet strict safety codes for decks or small patios. Linda explained, "We've taken up a small collection from some neighbors. We'd like to buy you this new station. It'll make your grill area even safer, and it'll be so up to code that Karen won't have any foot to stand on." Touched by their generosity, James hesitated. "Oh, this is too much. I can't let you folks spend your money on me." But Linda smiled. "After everything you've done for this community, teaching our kids, hosting friendly chats, it's the least we can do. Plus, it'll send a message that we stand by your right to grill in peace, so long as it's done responsibly." Reluctantly, James agreed, feeling a swirl of gratitude. Plans were set to install the new station the following weekend. A local handyman from down the street offered to help with the setup, ensuring everything was properly leveled and bolted into place. From her kitchen window, Karen watched the flurry of activity in James's backyard. She spotted boxes labeled with brand names indicating grilling accessories and safety mats. Her lips thinned into a line. It seemed that her attempt to clamp down on backyard hazards had only galvanized neighbors to solidify James's right to cook. But Karen was not one to give up quietly. She delved deep into the HOA bylaws, searching for any clause, no matter how obscure, that could justify stopping James's grill station from becoming a permanent fixture. Eventually, She found something about architectural changes requiring approval when adding structures to backyards. The guidelines were typically meant for gazebos or large sheds, but Karen decided to interpret them in the broadest sense possible. Armed with this newly unearthed clause, Karen called an impromptu site inspection. She roped in 2 other board members, pestered them, really, until they agreed to accompany her. Together, they marched across James's lawn, clipboards in hand. James, who was gently positioning the new metal station with Pete Albright, looked up to see the trio descending. He nodded politely. "Morning, Ms. Whitfield. Here to check out the new station? It meets every standard I'm aware of. It's on a fireproof mat, safely distanced from walls, and under the recommended height for any structure needing a permit." Karen smiled icily. "We have reason to believe you're making an unapproved architectural modification to your property. According to Bylaw 17.2, any addition, regardless of size, that remains a fixture must be evaluated by the Architectural Committee." One of the other board members, a woman named Janet, spoke up hesitantly. "Actually, this bylaw is generally for gazebos, large sheds, or fences. I'm not sure it applies to a small grill station. We rarely enforce it for portable items." Karen threw Janet a quick glare. "But this station appears anchored, does it not?" She pointed at the bolts. "If it's affixed to the ground, it may fall under the bylaw's domain." Pete Albright, standing beside James, folded his arms. "It's not anchored in a permanent sense. We've just got stabilizing brackets so it doesn't tip over. This is about safety, not permanent construction." Karen pursed her lips, scribbling on her clipboard as though she were documenting a crime scene. "We'll need to run this through the formal application process. Until then, any new structure on the property could be deemed unauthorized." James sighed. "Fine, I'll fill out the forms." Under normal circumstances, applying for architectural approval took a few days at most. But James knew Karen was likely to drag out the process. Still, he resolved to see it through calmly. No sense giving her ammunition by growing angry. A few weeks passed in a tense stalemate. James submitted the request, detailing the grill station's dimensions, fireproof mats, and compliance with local fire department guidelines. The board, minus Karen, seemed inclined to approve it swiftly. But Karen managed to stall the vote by claiming they needed extra clarifications. Meanwhile, neighbors became increasingly vocal in their support of James. Some posted friendly signs in their yards, referencing cookouts and reading "Grill on, James." There was talk of organizing a community barbecue. A local family offered their front lawn for a neighborhood potluck, inviting James to run the grilling station as a show of solidarity. All this neighborly enthusiasm only seemed to inflame Karen's determination. She began emailing the entire neighborhood about the grave importance of upholding safety standards. She issued stern reminders that any and all structural changes must be greenlit by the Architectural Committee to preserve property values and safety. A few residents responded by pointing out that Karen's interpretation of structure felt extreme. Others simply ignored her. But the drama loomed large, and tension crackled in the air each time James's grill gave off even the faintest puff of smoke. In the background of these HOA scuffles, a separate issue simmered: the fire department's frustration at being called out for no true emergency. The local fire station quietly filed a record of the false alarm. If more calls came from the same address without genuine cause, there could be fines or legal consequences. Although Karen was not personally fined, the city's approach was often lenient unless there was a pattern of repeated false reports. Her name and phone number were noted. The official stance was that if future calls from her turned out to be false, the matter might escalate. Karen seemed to sense this, but refused to back down publicly. She insisted she had done nothing wrong. James, for his part, still felt rattled by the memory of sirens blaring on what should have been a happy day with friends. He wanted no further drama, so he carefully monitored his grill, ensuring minimal smoke output. He even switched to a new brand of charcoal that touted a cleaner burn. This precaution only underscored how far he had gone to avoid trouble. Yet Karen continued to hound him via official HOA emails. Seeing how singled out James had become, a group of neighbors hatched a new plan: create a small communal cooking space in the neighborhood park adjacent to Oakbridge Vista. This park was under partial HOA oversight, but also partly city land. If they could establish a designated grill area, perhaps with a covered pavilion or a small stone fire ring. They could transform the entire grilling debate into a positive project. Word circulated about the potential for a senior cookout spot dedicated to the community's retirees who wanted to gather, socialize, and cook. Some residents pitched in small donations toward the cost of a heavy-duty, city-approved grill. Others volunteered labor to clear out a patch of undergrowth near the park's existing picnic tables. The city's parks department was receptive. An official pointed out that they had a program to encourage communal outdoor cooking. If Oak Bridge Vista's HOA would cover half the expenses, the city would match the rest. This was precisely the sort of synergy the neighborhood needed. Of course, to proceed, they needed HOA board approval. A lively debate ensued at the next board meeting. Many were excited by the plan. It would solve so many disputes, they said. We'd have a dedicated place to grill, maybe even hold neighborhood barbecues. Karen, though, was skeptical. She pointed out potential liabilities, the costs of insurance, and whether open flames in a park might invite rowdy gatherings. Yet she was increasingly isolated in her views. The rest of the board saw the value in a project that fostered community spirit. After some negotiation about safety measures, like a built-in water spigot, a secure waste bin, and clearly posted rules, the board voted in favor, 4-1. Karen's was the lone nay. Within a month, a small construction team began preparing the designated senior cookout spot. Volunteers from the neighborhood pitched in on weekends. They helped lay down a concrete pad and installed a sturdy, park-grade grill with adjustable grates. Yellow lines were painted to mark a recommended safe distance from the cooking area. Signage reminded users to douse coals thoroughly and keep the area tidy. James, though humbled by all this fuss on his behalf, felt touched by the outpouring of support. He recognized that the conflict had unexpectedly ignited a sense of unity. People who barely knew each other were now working side by side, mixing cement, hauling lumber, and exchanging smiles. One sunny afternoon, the finishing touches were added. Benches with small plaques dedicating the area to Oak Bridge Vista's senior neighbors. The plaque included a gentle homage to all who value the simple joy of a quiet grill out, a reference to James's hobby that had been so unfairly targeted. News of the nearing completion spread, and the board decided to host an official opening ceremony. They printed flyers announcing a community cookout and ribbon cutting. Residents were encouraged to bring food, friends, and a spirit of celebration. Even the local newspaper caught wind, sending a reporter to cover the story of a small HOA that overcame conflict by creating a communal cooking space. As the day of the community cookout approached, Karen found herself increasingly sidelined. She still clung to her arguments about risk of property damage or smoke drifting into neighboring yards, but the communal project's popularity overwhelmed her complaints. People politely listened to her concerns, then carried on with their preparations anyway. In one final attempt, Karen fired off a formal letter to the city, claiming that the new grill site was improperly sited and violated local health codes. The city official who received her letter politely informed the HOA board, who promptly forwarded their engineering and safety permits to refute each point. It became clear that Karen's protest was baseless. She had run out of leverage. On the morning of the cookout, as neighbors bustled to set up folding tables laden with food, salads, hot dog buns, condiments, fruit platters, Karen stood at the periphery, arms folded, nutmeg barking incessantly at passers-by. A few neighbors greeted her, but she offered only curt nods. The crisp smell of fresh charcoal soon wafted through the air. James arrived with a big grin, wearing a casual polo shirt and carrying packs of hot dogs and bratwursts. A round of applause broke out when he walked up to the grill. He laughed modestly, clearly not used to being the center of attention. The newly completed cooking station had never looked finer. Brand new, shining metal, a small shelter overhead in case of rain, and neat benches arranged for onlookers. Children chased each other around the picnic tables. An older couple sat quietly, enjoying the fresh air. Several middle-aged folks sipped lemonade and swapped stories about the project's progress. Music played softly from a neighbor's portable speaker. Karen hovered at the edges, occasionally grimacing if a puff of smoke drifted her way. But the smoke was minimal. This was a commercial-grade grill designed for efficient heat. If the smell of sizzling meat bothered her, she gave no sign except for a perpetual frown. It struck Minnie that if she had simply brought a dish to share or engaged with the neighbors, she might have found acceptance. But her posture, stiff and guarded, signaled she was not ready for that kind of camaraderie. With time, the official senior cookout spot became a beloved feature of Oakbridge Vista. Though James still sometimes grilled in his own backyard, especially on quieter weekdays, many neighbors invited him to cook out at the communal area on weekends. This space soon evolved into a casual social hub. People hosted birthday parties, potlucks, and even a small fundraiser for the local school's band program. Meanwhile, the board finally approved James's personal grill station at his house. The drawn-out architectural request ended in a resounding yes, with only Karen casting a symbolic dissent. The whole ordeal left her looking less authoritative and more like a nuisance, though she still sent out occasional emails reminding everyone of proper barbecue hours that existed nowhere in the bylaws. James took the high road throughout. Though he had every reason to resent Karen's meddling, he chose not to. Whenever they crossed paths, he gave her a polite nod. She sometimes scowled, but occasionally her face revealed a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps realizing she'd made an enemy out of someone who was never her foe to begin with. The rest of Oakbridge Vista moved forward, relieved that the conflict had mostly settled. Many realized the community had grown closer by pushing back against Karen's overreach. This newfound unity manifested in smaller ways too. Neighbors lending tools, picking up each other's mail, or just stopping to chat during evening walks. In time, the story of Karen's call to the fire department and the resulting fiasco became something of a cautionary tale in Oakbridge Vista lore. New families moving in would hear about it in hushed tones. "Oh, you better not cross Karen. She once called the fire trucks for a guy grilling hot dogs." The moral usually tacked on was, but the rest of us stuck together and supported him. We don't let bullies ruin our neighborly spirit. James, for his part, found he had grown from the ordeal. Initially mortified by the false alarm, he discovered an unexpected reservoir of goodwill from his community. The memory of the siren's wail had been replaced by the memory of an entire neighborhood coming to his side, building a designated cookout spot, and refusing to let petty tyranny stamp out their simple pleasures. As seasons changed, summer to autumn, then winter to spring, the senior cookout spot remained busy. On warm days, you could find retirees sipping iced tea, flipping burgers, or reminiscing about the old days. Younger families would join in too, teaching their kids how to roast marshmallows at a safe distance. Occasionally, people invited local firefighters to stop by for a burger, an ironic gesture that usually ended in laughter about the hot dog fiasco that started it all. Over the following year, Karen's strident presence at HOA meetings waned. She was still technically on the board, but contributed less with each session. Some speculated that after the false alarm embarrassment, and after seeing so many neighbors unify in defiance, Karen had lost the thirst for constant confrontation. Others suspected she might still be searching for her next big crusade. Either way, Oakbridge Vista enjoyed a more relaxed atmosphere. Neighborhood holiday decor blossomed more vibrantly than ever. A new sense of collaboration took root, and folks who once dreaded the mention of the HOA found renewed faith in the idea that the association could serve the people rather than harass them. Even Nutmeg, Karen's ever-barking Pomeranian, seemed quieter on morning walks. Perhaps dogs mirrored their owners' dispositions, or perhaps the neighbors were simply too content to notice the pup's yaps. To commemorate the grilling incident and celebrate their cohesive spirit, Oakbridge Vista began hosting an annual neighborhood cookout at the communal grill site each June. They called it the Oakbridge Smokeout, in a playful nod to the past. The event featured a chili cook-off, homemade pies, and of course, James presiding over a row of grills. Residents teased that he was their executive chef, though James insisted he was just a simple retiree who liked hot dogs. In the second year of the smokeout, people were surprised to see Karen make an appearance, unaccompanied by Nutmeg. She arrived late, carrying a plastic container of store-bought cookies, looking somewhat awkward. A hush fell as she approached. A few folks offered polite greetings. She nodded stiffly, then placed the cookies on a table and stood off to the side. No one quite knew what to say. After all, she had caused so many headaches, but perhaps this was her small gesture of reconciliation. James, noticing her from behind the grill, recalled the frustration she had caused him. But he also remembered that old teacher's ethic of compassion. So he smiled warmly, lifted a pair of tongs, and called across the gathering. "Good to see you, Ms. Whitfield. Could I interest you in a hot dog?" For a moment, Karen just stood there, mouth slightly open. Then she gave a small nod and approached. James pulled a perfectly grilled hot dog from the grate and handed it over in a bun. Karen held it, uncertain, as if she expected it might explode. Then she took a seat on the bench, quietly nibbling the edges. People resumed their conversations, the music and laughter swirling around, a subtle acceptance that she was there. Though Karen didn't exactly become the life of the party, this was the calmest, least confrontational moment anyone had shared with her in ages. Some suspected she might be turning a corner, learning that living in a community meant more than citing rules and calling authorities. By the close of that second annual smokeout, many Oakbridge Vista residents felt a renewed pride in their neighborhood. They had come a long way from the tense days of Karen's false alarm. The newly minted senior cookout spot stood as a testament to how adversity could bring people together rather than drive them apart. James, tidying up the grill area, paused to watch Karen slip quietly away, leaving her half-eaten hot dog and empty cookie container on a table. He wasn't sure if she'd come back next time or if she'd revert to old habits. But he did know that a flicker of hope existed. People could change, or at least find ways to coexist without constant hostility. He wiped the grill grate clean, reflecting on the fact that, in many ways, he had gained more than he lost. The false alarm fiasco, humiliating as it was, had sparked friendships. He had discovered just how many neighbors appreciated a simple pastime like grilling. The community spirit that had taken root made Oakbridge Vista feel more vibrant, more welcoming, and more supportive than any rule or regulation could ever ensure. Over time, the incident of Karen calling the firefighters became neighborhood folklore. New families heard the tale and often laughed at the absurdity of overreacting to someone grilling hot dogs. Yet they also admired how the community banded together to support James, forging not just a resolution to a conflict, but a tradition of cooking and camaraderie. Karen continued living in Oakbridge Vista, somewhat subdued. She still occasionally peppered the neighborhood with curt emails about lawn maintenance or trash can placement, but she never again dared to involve the fire department or any other emergency service over minor irritations. It was as if the entire fiasco had taught her, albeit reluctantly, that weaponizing authority against neighborly joys could backfire spectacularly. And so, Oakbridge Vista settled into a more peaceful rhythm. On any given weekend, you might find Mr. James Leland grilling quietly behind his ranch house, humming a tune from his teaching days, or you might spot him at the communal cookout area, sharing stories with neighbors while flipping hot dogs to a perfect golden brown. The gentle smoke rising from the grill no longer signaled alarm. It signaled fellowship. Children's laughter often rang out as they scampered around, waiting eagerly for a taste of something delicious. Nearby, a group of seniors sipped iced tea and reminisced about how a moment of tension had blossomed into a better sense of togetherness. As for Karen, sometimes she would pass by, the echo of Nutmeg's bark trailing behind her. Now and then, she'd pause to glance at the contented faces gathered around the grill. Perhaps she felt a twinge of regret, or maybe the stirring of envy, at how these neighbors shared a warmth that her rigid rules and stiff posture had kept at bay for so long. If she ever chose to soften, truly soften, she would find open arms waiting. But that was a choice only she could make. In the end, the hot dog saga of Oakbridge Vista left a lasting legacy. A safe, city-sanctioned barbecue spot, an HOA newly reminded of its real purpose, to help rather than hinder, and a quiet retiree who became, however unintentionally, the symbol of a neighborhood's perseverance. Karen's false alarm ironically led to the birth of a permanent cookout nook that thrives under friendly supervision, a place where laughter and the smell of sizzling food triumph over petty disputes, and where the flicker of a charcoal flame stands not for danger, but for the simple, abiding spirit of community.